The valley remembers what people forget. That was something Walter Briggs used to say on cold mornings when the fog sat low over Calhoun County and the hills turned the color of old iron. He said it the way a man says something he has carried for a long time, not as philosophy, not as poetry, just as fact. The valley remembers. People forget. And the difference between those two things, Walter believed, was the difference between losing everything and keeping what mattered. Owen Briggs was 9 years old. The autumn his grandfather took him to the Calhoun County Mineral Rights Auction. It was October of 1958. The fairgrounds on the edge of Grantsville smelled of hay and diesel, and the particular kind of cold that comes in off the hills before the leaves are fully down. Owen wore a canvas coat 2 sizes too large, handed down from a cousin, and he carried a school composition notebook and a box of 12 crayons he had asked his mother for 3 weeks before the auction, for reasons he could not fully explain even to himself. He had spent the night before sitting at the kitchen table under the single overhead light drawing. He drew the property lines the way Walter had described them over supper, going back over each line twice to make it solid. He drew the creek that ran along the eastern edge in blue. He drew the old fence line in brown. He drew the 47 acres of pasture and cornfield in green the way he imagined it looked from above, the way he had seen maps look in the encyclopedia at school. He drew a small square in the center of everything and labeled it in careful 9-year-old handwriting Briggs Farm. He drew the surrounding parcels in red, all 14,000 acres of them, and he labeled those too Crestline. He had heard that name at the kitchen table enough times to know it mattered. Walter looked at the map that morning before they left. He stood over it with his coffee and looked for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Put it in the notebook." Owen tore it carefully along the spiral edge and tucked it into the front cover. The auction was held in the main exhibition hall. 4 long tables pushed end to end at the front of the room. A coffee urn on a folding table near the door that had been running since early morning and showed it. 40 or 50 people in folding chairs, most of them men in work clothes, a few in suits, most there to watch rather than bid. Walter sat in the second row with his hands flat on his knees. He was 68 years old. His hands were the hands of a man who had spent decades underground before he bought his land broad across the knuckles, permanently darkened in the creases from coal dust that soap had never fully reached. He had turned down 4 purchase offers from Crestline in the preceding 2 years. He had not explained his reasoning to anyone except Owen, and even then only in pieces spread across evenings, more instruction than conversation. Gerald Vance arrived last. He came through the side door with a leather briefcase and the particular ease of a man who considers a room already settled before he enters it. He was 45 years old, thick in the shoulders, wearing a suit that had not been bought in West Virginia. His shoes were the kind Owen had only seen in magazine advertisements. He set his briefcase on the front table, looked out at the room with the measured patience of someone who had done this many times in many counties, and began organizing his papers. His eyes moved across the rows and stopped on Owen. He looked at the composition notebook. He looked at the crayons on the seat beside the boy. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile yet, something gathering toward one. "Real estate by crayon," Vance said. He said it loud. He said it the way a man says something when he wants the room to hear it, and does not particularly care whether the target hears it too. The room responded the way rooms respond when someone with a briefcase sets the tone. A ripple of laughter, not cruel exactly, just the reflex of people following the person who seems most certain. A man 2 rows back shook his head, the way men shake their heads at children who wander into adult situations. Someone near the door said something Owen could not make out, and the man beside him laughed. Owen did not look up from his notebook. Walter did not look at Vance. He leaned down slowly the way he did everything without hurry, without performance, and put his mouth close to Owen's ear. He spoke quietly enough that the words did not reach the row in front of them. Owen listened. Then he opened the notebook to the inside front cover, picked up the brown crayon and wrote 4 words on the blank space below the map. He looked at what he had written for a moment. Then he tore the page out along the spiral edge, folded it in quarters, and put it in the front pocket of the canvas coat. Vance moved through the auction the way water moves through a channel it has already carved. The bidding on the surrounding mineral rights parcels was brief. Crestline had arranged most of the financing before the auction began, and the competing bids were thin. 14,000 acres of mineral extraction rights for the coal and natural gas deposits underlying the hills north and west and south of Grantsville, transferred to Meridian Agricultural Holdings, Crestline's land acquisition subsidiary, in just under 90 minutes. Vance signed the final transfer documents without reading them closely. He shook 3 hands. He picked up his briefcase. He walked past Walter Briggs on the way to the side door. "Good luck with your pasture," Vance said. He did not slow down. Walter watched him go. After the room began to empty, a county clerk came by with copies of the surrounding transfer documents as a matter of routine. Walter folded them into his coat pocket with the same unhurried deliberateness he brought to everything. He put his hand on Owen's shoulder and they walked out to the truck together. The drive back to the farm took 22 minutes. Neither of them spoke. June Briggs. Walter's daughter-in-law had supper on the table when they came in. She was the kind of woman who understood that certain silences were not emptiness but weight, and she did not fill them unnecessarily. She set 3 plates and poured water and sat down, and they ate. Owen's father had died of a lung condition 4 years earlier, the inheritance of a decade underground, before the safety regulations changed. And it was the 3 of them now on the farm, June and Walter and Owen, arranged around the same table in the same configuration. Every evening, the empty chair at the end of the table, not acknowledged, not forgotten. After supper, Walter spread 3 papers across the table. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at Owen. "Keep your map," he said. Owen nodded. Walter tapped one of the papers once with his index finger. Not hard, just a single tap, the way you tap something you want to be remembered. Then he folded all 3 back into his coat and went to bed. Owen sat alone at the table. He took the folded page out of his coat pocket and opened it. He looked at the 4 words he had written in brown crayon under the map, while Vance's laughter was still moving through the room. He looked at them for a long time. Then he folded the paper back into quarters and put it back in his pocket and went to do the evening chores. He was 9 years old. He did not fully understand yet what Walter had shown him, but he understood the way a boy understands certain things before the words exist for them in the chest, rather than the head that Gerald Vance had made a mistake today. A quiet one, the kind that takes a long time to matter. Walter died in the spring of 1963. He went the way men of his generation often went, without much announcement. A Tuesday morning, the coffee on the stove, the back door open to the April air, and then he was simply not there anymore. He was 73 years old. He left Owen the 47 acres, the farmhouse, the equipment, and a tin box from the shelf in the back room, sealed with a brass latch tied with a length of kitchen twine. Owen's mother and the other women in the family looked at the tin box, once saw land records and tax papers and survey copies, and set it aside. Nothing that looked like money. Nothing that looked like what people look for when a man dies. Owen opened it that same night. He sat at the kitchen table with the box in front of him and worked through it the way Walter had worked through everything, slowly, without skipping reading each document fully before moving to the next. There were tax receipts going back to 1931, when Walter had bought the 47 acres. There were survey plats with hand-drawn annotations in Walter's particular cramped printing. There were 2 letters from the county assessor's office and 1 from a neighboring landowner about a fence line dispute that had been resolved in 1947. At the bottom of the box, separated from the other papers by a piece of cardboard, were 3 documents held together with a rusted paperclip. The first was a survey notice from 1924, issued by the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources. It described the geological survey of what the document called Aquifer Corridor 14B, a subterranean water-bearing formation running approximately half a mile through the bedrock beneath what was then unincorporated land in Calhoun County. The survey noted the corridor's dimensions, its depth, its connection to the larger underground water system of the region. It was a routine survey notice of the kind the state issued when it mapped subsurface features. Owen had never seen a document like it. He read it twice. The second document was dated 1931. The deed to the 47 acres recording Walter Briggs as owner of record, including in language Owen had to read 3 times to follow the subsurface mineral and water rights appurtenant to the described parcel to the extent permitted under West Virginia law. Then, in effect, the third document was a letter dated September 1944. It was on state letterhead signed by the director of the West Virginia Division of Water Resources. It stated in plain language that following a disputed claim by the Harmon Mining Company regarding extraction rights in the Calhoun County Basin, the division had reviewed the subsurface ownership records and confirmed that Aquifer Corridor 14B, as surveyed in 1924, fell within the subsurface boundaries of the parcel owned by Walter J. Briggs, and that any extraction activity intersecting or drawing from said corridor required the written consent of the owner of record under the West Virginia Water Resources Act of 1891. Owen read that letter 4 times. He was 14 years old. He did not know what aquifer meant. He knew the word corridor. He knew what consent meant. He knew that Crestline Energy, which had just purchased the extraction rights to the 14,000 acres surrounding his family's land, planned at some point to drill into the ground beneath those acres. He did not know yet how drilling worked or what it required, but he understood with the same chest-level certainty he had felt at the auction 5 years earlier that Walter had known something Gerald Vance did not know. He put the 3 documents back under the cardboard. He closed the tin box and latched it. He put it back on the shelf in the back room where Walter had kept it. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and took out the folded page from the front pocket of the canvas coat, which he had worn every day since October of 1958, and which hung now on the hook by the back door. He opened the page. He looked at the 4 words in brown crayon. Then he put it back in the coat pocket and went to find a dictionary. The Grantsville Public Library opened at 9 on Tuesday mornings. Owen was there the following Tuesday at 5 minutes past 9. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Hattie Colson, who had worked that building for 30 years, watched him come through the door and go directly to the reference section without stopping at the card catalog. He pulled the encyclopedia volume for the letter A. He found what he was looking for in 4 minutes. He read the entry 3 times. He copied 2 paragraphs into his composition notebook in his careful handwriting. Then he went to the card catalog and asked Mrs. Colson where the legal reference books were kept. He came back the following Tuesday and the Tuesday after that. Over the next 14 months, he worked through the county deed indexes the way a man works through a long job, methodically without rushing, setting each volume back in its exact position before taking the next. He was not looking for anything he did not already know existed. He was learning to read the language that surrounded what he knew, so that when the time came he would understand what he was holding. In the spring of 1965, a man from Crestline's land division came to the farm. He was young, early 30s, pleasant manner, good shoes. He sat at the kitchen table with a folder and explained that Crestline was expanding its survey operations in Calhoun County and had an interest in the Briggs parcel. He said the word opportunity several times. He offered $12,000 for the full 47 acres. Owen was 16 years old. He listened to the entire presentation without speaking. Then he said, "I appreciate you coming out." He stood up and offered his hand. The man from Crestline shook it, uncertain whether the meeting was over, then gathered his folder and left. He filed a report that afternoon. Minor. Uneducated. Probably waiting for a higher number. Owen was not waiting for a higher number. The property taxes on the Briggs farm were paid every April, without exception. In 1965, the bill was $11. In 1968, it was $14. Owen paid each one in person at the county assessor's office, waited for the receipt, and brought the receipt home to the tin box. He kept the receipts in a separate envelope held with a rubber band, organized by year with the amount and the date written on each one in pencil. In March of 1968, Owen drove to the county clerk's office in Grantsville and filed a quiet title action on the 47 acres and the appurtenant subsurface rights. The filing cost $28. He had written out the language himself after 3 months of Tuesday afternoons in the legal reference section. The clerk stamped the papers without looking up from her desk. The action put his claim to the aquifer corridor on public record. Any title search from that day forward would find it if the searcher looked in the right place. The right place was not where most searchers looked. Mineral rights and water rights were maintained in separate indexes at the county courthouse in different rooms on different filing systems. A title company doing due diligence on a mineral extraction purchase would search the mineral index. They would not unless specifically instructed. Pull the water rights index. Owen had learned this in the legal reference section. He filed in the water rights index. He drove home from the courthouse and told June what he had done. She listened from across the kitchen. She said your grandfather would have done the same thing. Then she went back to the dishes. That was enough. In the summer of 1970, Crestline began exploratory drilling operations on the northern section of their Calhoun County holdings. Owen read about it in the county newspaper. He drove out on a Sunday afternoon and watched the equipment from the county road. The drill rigs were larger than anything he had seen working locally. The crew was professional, out-of-county efficient. He noted the date in a new composition notebook he had started for the purpose, a green spiral-bound one June had given him for his birthday. He noted the GPS coordinates as best he could estimate them from the county road, the direction the equipment was facing, the number of rigs he could count. He came back the following Sunday. The rigs had moved south. He noted it. He came back the Sunday after that. The rigs were further south again, closer to the boundary of the aquifer corridor. He noted it. He wrote one sentence at the bottom of the entry. They are coming toward it. He underlined it once. Then he closed the notebook and drove home. In October of 1971, a man named Ray Sutter knocked on the farmhouse door. He represented a land investment group, he said. He had an easy manner and a practiced smile, and he produced from his folder a cashier's check made out to Owen Briggs for $15,000. He set it on the kitchen table. "Fast, clean, close," he said. "No fuss." Owen looked at the check. He looked at Sutter. He said, "I appreciate the trip." He shook Sutter's hand and walked him to the door. Sutter sat in his car in the driveway for a minute before he left, the way people do when they have not quite processed what just happened. That evening, Owen drove out to the north end of the Briggs property and walked the boundary line with a flashlight. He walked it twice. He checked the 4 iron survey pins that marked the corners of the parcel, pressing his thumb against each one to feel the solidity of it in the ground. All 4 were where they should be. He wrote in the notebook October 14, 1971, all 4 pins clear. Sutter came today. 15,000. Declined. Drilling crew moved south again last week. 3 rigs, they know what they are looking for. He closed the notebook and walked back to the truck. The night was cold and clear, and the hills were dark against a sky full of stars. He started the engine and sat for a moment before driving. He thought about Walter standing at the kitchen table tapping the paper once with his index finger. Not hard. Just once. He thought about the tin box on the shelf in the back room. He thought about the 4 words in brown crayon in the front pocket of the canvas coat. Then he put the truck in gear and drove home through the dark. In the spring of 1975, Owen planted a kitchen garden along the south wall of the farmhouse where the sun hit longest. June had wanted one for years. He built the raised beds himself from lumber he had milled from a fallen oak at the edge of the property. He dug the beds out 18 inches deep and mixed in compost from the pile behind the barn that Walter had maintained since 1948 and that Owen had maintained since 1963. He planted tomatoes and pole beans and 3 rows of sweet corn. He watered them from the well that Walter had dug by hand in 1931, a well that drew from the same aquifer system that ran beneath the property in the formation the state had surveyed in 1924. June came out one morning to look at the beds. She stood at the edge with her coffee and looked at the stakes and the new-turned earth. She said, "It took you 12 years to get around to this." Owen said the lumber wasn't ready until now. She looked at him in the way she had developed over the years, a look that understood more than it required to be spoken. Then she went back inside. The well drew cold and clear and never ran low. Not in any summer Owen could remember. He noted this in the green notebook each spring when he tested the water level. A depth measurement with a length of rope and a weighted float that Walter had taught him to make. He included the measurement in each annual entry. Over 14 years, the variation was less than 8 inches in either direction. The aquifer was stable, consistent, reliable in the way that things are reliable when they have been that way for a very long time. In August of 1976, Owen drove to the county clerk's office for the second time in 8 years and pulled the public record of every permit application filed in Calhoun County in the preceding 24 months. There were 19 of them. 14 were filed under different LLC names. All 14 shared a registered agent at a law firm in Charleston. Owen copied the registered agent's name and address into his notebook. He went to the library on the way home and looked up the law firm in the West Virginia Bar Directory. The firm's listed clients included Crestline Energy Corporation. The exploration had grown. What had begun as coal extraction planning in 1958 had shifted by 1976 to natural gas. The permit applications used language Owen had to look up in the legal reference section: hydraulic stimulation, deep formation, extraction, water injection. He read about these processes over 3 Tuesday afternoons. He understood when he was done reading that the extraction method Crestline was moving toward required injection of water under high pressure into the rock formation far below the surface, and that the effectiveness of that process depended significantly on the underground water conditions in the surrounding geology. He understood something else. He had read enough of the West Virginia Water Resources Act of 1891 to know that deep extraction operations that drew from or intersected a privately owned aquifer formation required a written consent agreement with the owner of record. Not a purchase, not an easement. A consent agreement renewed in writing every 7 years under the terms of the 1891 Act, as it had been amended in 1923. Without that agreement, Crestline's permits for their most promising extraction sites would not be approvable under state law. Without that agreement, their plans for the northern Calhoun County basin were not plans. They were drawings. Owen drove home from the library in the late afternoon, the hills going orange and red around him in the October light. June had the kettle on when he came in. She set 2 cups out the way she always did and sat across from him. He spread the notebook open on the table between them. She looked at the pages. She looked at him. He said they have been planning around something they do not know they need permission for. She looked at the notebook again. She said, "How long have you known?" "Since I was 14, he said. She picked up her cup. She did not say anything for a moment. Outside, the last of the afternoon light was going off the hills, and the yard was settling into the early dark of October evenings in West Virginia. "How long until they figure it out?" she said. He looked out the window. He said when they need it badly enough to look carefully enough. She nodded. She drank her tea. He drank his. Outside the window, the well cover sat in the yard, the way it had sat since 1931, a weathered wooden square over the stone casing. Perfectly ordinary, drawing from the same water that ran through the rock 180 feet below in formation. 14B, the same water the state had surveyed in 1924. The same water the state had confirmed belonged to the Briggs family in a letter signed by the director of the Division of Water Resources in September of 1944. Owen closed the notebook. He finished his tea. Then he went out to check the evening fences the way Walter had done, and the way Owen had done every evening since 1963. And the hills were dark against the sky, and the valley held its silence the way it always had, patient and complete, remembering everything that people in their hurry forgot. The years moved the way years move on a working farm, not in chapters but in seasons, each one carrying the weight of the one before it. Owen Briggs turned 30 in 1979 and did not mark the occasion with anything more than an extra cup of coffee at the kitchen table before the morning chores. June made a pie. They ate it after supper without much ceremony. That was the way of things on the Briggs farm. What mattered was what continued. What continued was the work. Owen ran cattle on the lower pastures and cut hay twice a year from the upper fields. He kept the fence lines clear and the equipment maintained, and the well casing inspected every spring after the ground thaw. He paid his taxes in April and filed his annual water rights maintenance documentation at the county clerk's office every 3rd year, as the amended 1923 statute required a filing that cost $4, and that the clerk processed without comment, because almost no one else in Calhoun County filed one, and she had learned not to ask questions she would not understand the answers to. He kept the green notebook current, 1 entry per week, sometimes less. The entries were brief and factual. Dates, observations, parcel numbers when he could read them off the survey stakes Crestline's crews left in the ground, license plates of equipment trucks when the light was good enough. He had filled 2 full notebooks by 1979 and started a 3rd. Crestline filed 12 new permit applications in Calhoun County between 1977 and 1981. Owen pulled each one from the public record at the courthouse within 2 weeks of filing. He read them at the library on Tuesday afternoons and made notes. The permits described extraction targets that moved progressively closer to the geological area he understood to be dependent on the aquifer corridor beneath his land. The technical language had become familiar to him over 15 years of Tuesday afternoons. He read it the way a man reads a weather report when he has been watching the same sky for a long time. He could see what was coming before the people filing the papers could see it themselves. In the spring of 1982, Crestline Energy went public on the New York Stock Exchange. The county newspaper ran a brief article. Owen read it over breakfast and noted the date in the notebook. A public company needed results on a timeline that a private one did not. Shareholders expected returns. Boards expected plans. Plans became pressures. Pressures made people move faster than they should. He noted that too. The knock came on a Tuesday morning in March of 1986. Owen was on the roof of the equipment barn replacing 3 sections of corrugate that had buckled under the previous winter's ice. He heard the car in the driveway from up there, a sound too clean and too deliberate for a county road truck, and he finished nailing the section he was working on before he came down. The man waiting by the back door was perhaps 50, silver-haired, carrying a soft leather briefcase that had not been bought in West Virginia. He introduced himself as Frank Slade, Senior Counsel for Crestline Energy Corporation. His handshake was measured and professional. He had the manner of a man who had conducted many of these conversations in many driveways and considered himself skilled at them. June appeared at the screen door. Owen looked at her briefly. She went to put the kettle on. Slade sat at the kitchen table with his briefcase open and a single folder in front of him. He was direct, which Owen respected. He said Crestline had identified the Briggs parcel as relevant to their long-term extraction planning in the northern Calhoun Basin. He said the company was prepared to offer $380,000 for the full 47 acres, including all surface and subsurface rights. He set the offer letter on the table. It was typed on heavy paper with the Crestline letterhead across the top. Owen looked at the letter. He did not pick it up. June set 2 cups on the table and went back to the counter. Owen looked at Slade. He said, "I appreciate you making the drive." Then he pushed the letter back across the table, not rudely, just far enough to be clear. Slade's expression did not change, but something behind it tightened by a fraction. He had not expected the conversation to be this short. He tried once more. He mentioned the difficulty of maintaining an isolated parcel surrounded by active industrial operations. He mentioned environmental considerations that could arise as drilling intensified in the surrounding area. He said these things in the careful language of a man who wants the implication to land without the words being legally actionable. Owen listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "The farm has been here since 1931. I expect it will keep." Slade packed his folder and left. His report to the Crestline board 2 days later described Owen Briggs as a rural landowner with limited education and no legal representation, likely holding out for a higher cash offer. The board approved a ceiling of $600,000 for a follow-up approach and assigned the file to a junior acquisitions manager. Owen did not know about the report. He would not have been surprised by it. He went back up on the barn roof and finished the last section of corrugate before the afternoon clouds came in off the ridge. The summer of 1988 was dry. The creek along the eastern boundary dropped to its lowest level in 20 years, and the lower pasture went brown by July. Owen trucked water for the cattle twice a week through August. The well drawing from the aquifer below did not drop. It ran the same as it always ran, cold and clear and consistent. Owen noted the level in August and again in September, when the rains finally came back. The variation was 4 inches. He wrote it in the notebook and underlined it. In October of that year, he made his fall boundary walk. He parked at the north end of the property as he always did and walked the perimeter clockwise, checking each survey pin in sequence. The first 3 were where they had always been solid in the ground undisturbed. The 4th pin, the northeast corner marker, was wrong. He felt it before he fully saw it. The angle of approach to where the pin should have been was off by something his feet registered before his eyes did. He stopped 4 feet short and looked at the ground. The marker was there, but it was not where it had been in April. He was certain of this the way he was certain of things he had checked twice a year for 20 years. He did not touch it. He walked back to this truck and drove to Grantsville and called a land surveyor he had used once before, a man named Dale Purcell, who worked out of a one-room office on the courthouse square and who had a reputation for accuracy and discretion. Owen described what he had found. Purcell came out the following morning with his equipment. It took Purcell 40 minutes to confirm what Owen already knew. The northeast corner pin had been moved 14 inches to the southwest. In terms of acreage, the change was negligible, less than 1/10 of an acre. But in terms of what it represented, it was not negligible at all. The marker had been moved to push the recorded boundary of the Briggs parcel away from the northeast edge of the aquifer corridor, by enough to create a legal argument that the corridor ran outside the Briggs property line. Purcell filed a survey correction report with the county. Owen filed a boundary violation report with the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources. He did both on the same day. He attached Purcell's certified measurements and the original 1931 deed plat and the 1944 letter from the Water Resources Division. Crestline received a notice of boundary violation and a civil penalty of $4,200. They paid it within 30 days. No one from Crestline called Owen or came to the door. The payment was processed by their accounting department like any other regulatory fine. Owen read the notice of payment at the kitchen table. He put it in the tin box. He went out and reset the survey pin to its correct position and poured a small amount of concrete around the base, a thing he had not done before and did not need explanation for now. He wrote in the notebook, October 1988, northeast pin moved southwest, 14 inches, origin Crestline survey crew, dates estimated September 14th through 18th, based on ground disturbance pattern. Purcell survey correction filed. Boundary violation report filed. Penalty paid $4,200. Pin reset and secured. They know what they need. They tried the short way first. He closed the notebook. Then he opened it again and added one more line. They will try the law next. He was right about that. He was right about most things he wrote in the notebooks. Not because he was smarter than the people across the boundary line, because he had been paying attention to the same thing for 30 years, while they had been paying attention to many things for much shorter periods of time. Attention sustained over decades is a different instrument than intelligence applied in bursts. Walter had understood this. Owen had learned it. It was he had come to believe the main thing the auction room in 1958 had taught him, though it had taken him until his 40s to find the words for it. Nora was born in 1975, the year Owen filed his first formal water rights maintenance documentation. She grew up on the farm the way children grow up in places where the work is always present, not separate from daily life, but woven through it. She learned to drive the tractor at 11. She could read a survey plat before she started high school. She had her own composition notebook by the time she was 12, not because Owen gave her one, but because she had watched him write in his for as long as she could remember, and had simply begun doing the same thing. She was 13 in the fall of 1988 when Owen found the moved survey pin. He did not tell her about it that evening, but she saw the concrete bags in the truck bed the next morning, and she asked, and he told her plainly. She wrote it in her own notebook. She asked one question: why would they move it only 14 inches? Owen said, because they thought 14 inches was enough, and they thought nobody would notice. She wrote that down, too. In September of 1990, Nora started her sophomore year at Grantsville High School. She was quiet in the way that Owen was quiet observant rather than withdrawn. Her teachers noted that she asked good questions and took careful notes and rarely spoke in class, unless she was certain of what she wanted to say. One teacher described her in a report as having an unusual capacity for patience in a student her age. The teacher meant it as a mild concern. It was not a concern. It was the most useful thing Nora Briggs possessed. The second offer from Crestline came in the spring of 1991. This time there was no in-person visit. A letter arrived from Slade's office in Charleston formal language, referenced the previous discussion, proposed a revised consideration of $550,000 for the full parcel, including all appurtenant rights. Owen read it at the kitchen table. He wrote one sentence in the notebook. Second offer, May 3rd, 1991. 550,000 Slade. Declined by letter, May 9th. Then he wrote the response himself. 3 sentences on plain paper. Thanked them for their continued interest, indicated the property was not for sale. Wished them well in their operations. He mailed it at the Grantsville post office on his way to the feed store. June was standing at the kitchen window when he got back. She had been watching the road more often in recent months. Not anxiously. Just the way a person watches something they have learned to pay attention to. She said how much this time. He said 550. She turned from the window. She said, "They are getting worried." He said, "Not yet. Worried comes later." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "How is the well?" He said, "Same as always." She nodded and went back to what she had been doing. That was the way they talked about it. The well was never just the well. They both knew that. They had known it for years without either of them saying so directly. By 1994, Crestline had completed 8 extraction wells on their Calhoun County holdings. The wells on the northern section, the ones furthest from the aquifer corridor, performed adequately. The wells on the central section, the ones the geologists had identified in the early 1980s as the most productive formation in the basin, required pressures and injection volumes that the geology would not sustain at the levels the engineering models had projected. The extraction yields were 60% of forecast. The board meetings in Charleston grew longer. The shareholder calls grew more careful in their language. Derek Holt joined Crestline's executive team in 1996. He was 31 years old, an MBA from the University of Virginia, previously with a natural gas firm in Texas that had expanded its Appalachian operations through a series of aggressive acquisitions. He understood the geology of the region better than most executives who came to it from outside, and he understood it well enough to see what the internal reports were, careful not to state plainly. The central Calhoun Basin wells were underperforming because the aquifer conditions in the surrounding formation were not what the extraction models assumed. The models assumed open access. The geology required something the models had not accounted for. He pulled every permit application, every geological survey, every engineering report Crestline had filed in Calhoun County since 1970. He read them over a weekend in his office in Charleston. On Monday morning, he called the company's outside environmental counsel and asked a single question. Is there a private water rights holder with a recorded claim on any formation in the northern Calhoun Basin? The attorney searched the mineral rights index. She found nothing encumbering the Crestline parcels. She reported back that afternoon. Holt accepted the answer. He had no reason not to. The attorney had searched where attorneys searched. She had not searched the water rights index in the other building. In 1997, the calendar turned in ways that had nothing to do with Crestline or mineral rights or any of the things Owen had spent his adult life attending to. June began losing weight in January. She said nothing about it for 2 months, the way she said nothing about things until she was ready to speak of them. In March, she went to the doctor in Grantsville. In April, she went to a specialist in Charleston. In May, Owen drove her to the appointment where the word the doctor used was cancer, and he sat beside her in the chair provided for family members and held her hand in both of his and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would be more useful than simply being there. The treatment began in June. The drives to Charleston 3 times a week through the summer. The bills that began arriving in July, each one more specific and more considerable than the one before. Owen paid them from the farm account, then from savings. Then he went to the Grantsville Savings and Loan and sat across from a man he had known for 20 years and arranged a loan against the 47 acres. The man said nothing that needed to be said about the irony of the situation. because Owen had not told him about Crestline, and the man had no way of knowing. He processed the loan the same way he processed any loan against farmland in Calhoun County, and Owen drove home with what he needed. Nora was 22 that summer, finishing her third year at West Virginia University, where she was enrolled in the pre-law program. She came home on weekends through June and July. She helped with the farm work in the mornings and sat with June in the afternoons, and drove to Charleston with Owen on the treatment days when her schedule allowed. On a Saturday evening in August, she came and found Owen at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of him. She sat down across from him. She looked at the papers. She looked at him. She said, "Dad, they have offered $500,000. He did not look up immediately. She said it plainly because she was his daughter's, and she understood him well enough to know that plainness was the only thing that would be heard. She said, "Mom needs what she needs. The money would cover everything. All of it. There would be enough left over to run the farm for 10 years without worrying." She put her hand flat on the table between them. She said, "The land is important. I know what it means. But she is more important." Owen looked at her hand on the table. He sat with it for a long time. The kind of long time that would have felt uncomfortable in any other house, but did not feel uncomfortable here because silence in the Briggs kitchen had always carried weight rather than awkwardness. June was asleep in the back room. The farm was quiet outside. The well cover sat in the yard where it had always sat. Owen got up from the table. He went to the back room and looked at June sleeping. He stood in the doorway for a while. Then he came back to the kitchen, and he stood at the window and he looked out at the yard in the dark. In the morning, he called a man in Spencer he knew who bought used farm equipment, and he sold the baler and the older of the 2 tractors and a set of implements he had not used in 4 years. Then he went to the Grantsville Bank and increased the loan against the farm by the amount remaining after the equipment sale. He brought the total home in the form of a cashier's check and put it in the envelope with the next specialist bill. He did not call Crestline. He did not tell June what he had done. She found out in November when the equipment man came to collect the baler, and she asked Owen about it, and he told her. She looked at him for a long moment. She did not ask about the rest of it. She turned back to the window and watched the man load the baler onto his trailer and drive it away down the county road. That evening, she reached across the table and put her hand over his. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Nora drove back to Morgantown on Sunday. She called on Tuesday. She did not ask about the land. She asked about June. Owen told her the levels were better, and the specialist was cautiously optimistic, which was true. Nora said she would be home the following weekend. She was quiet for a moment before she hung up. Then she said, "I understand why, Dad." Owen said, "I know you do." She did. And what she understood was not just that he had chosen to find another way, but that in finding another way, he had given her something she had not expected. She had thought she was asking him to choose between the land and her mother. He had answered by refusing the choice entirely. She spent a long time thinking about that on the drive back to Morgantown. It was the kind of answer that changed how a person understood a question. She changed her area of focus in her second year of law school the following fall. Property rights, water law, natural resources, the specific and demanding intersection of those 3 disciplines that most law students avoided because the statutes were old and the case law was thin and the work was painstaking. She found she did not mind painstaking. She had grown up watching a man pay meticulous attention to the same thing for decades. Painstaking was not a burden to her. It was familiar. June recovered slowly through 1998 and into 1999. The specialist used the word remission in April of 1999, and June received it with the same measured composure she had received everything else. Not relief exactly, not celebration, just a careful acknowledgement that things had gone one way rather than another, and that this was worth noting. Owen drove home from that appointment in silence for the first 40 miles. June watched the hills go past. Then she said, "I want to replant the south garden." Owen said, "We will do it in May." They did it in May. Crestline filed 11 permit applications in Calhoun County between 1998 and 2001. 8 of them were for extraction sites in the Central Basin. 3 of those 8 targeted geological formations that Owen's notebooks described, in terms that matched the technical language he had spent 20 years learning to read. He pulled every application from the courthouse record within 2 weeks of each filing. He read them at the kitchen table now rather than the library. He had long since bought his own copies of the relevant statutes. In January of 2001, a letter arrived from a law firm in Charleston that Owen did not recognize. It was addressed to Owen Briggs, owner of Record Parcel 14, Section 7, Calhoun County. It informed him that Crestline Energy Corporation, through its counsel, was initiating a legal proceeding under West Virginia property law to establish that the subsurface water rights appurtenant to the Briggs parcel had been effectively abandoned due to non-commercial use over a period exceeding 10 years, and that said rights had therefore passed by operation of law to the adjacent mineral rights holder under the dormant rights provisions of the West Virginia Code. Owen read the letter twice. He set it on the kitchen table. He went to the shelf in the back room and brought out the tin box. He opened it and took out the 3 documents under the cardboard. He laid them beside the letter. He looked at all 4 pieces of paper together. Then he called Nora. She was 26 years old and 7 months from finishing her law degree. She answered on the second ring. Owen read her the letter in its entirety without comment. She was quiet when he finished. He heard the specific quality of her silence, not uncertainty, something the opposite of uncertainty. He had heard that quality in her voice before and recognized it. She said, "Dad, how many consecutive years of property tax receipts do you have on the water rights parcel?" He said, "Every year since 1963, 38 years. She said nothing for a moment. He said, "Plus your great-grandfather's receipts from 1931 through 1963. 32 years before that." She said, 70 years. He said, 70 years. She said, "I am coming Saturday." She drove the 60 miles from Morgantown on Saturday morning with a box of documents on the passenger seat and arrived before breakfast. She spread everything across the kitchen table in an order that made sense to her. Owen brought coffee. June sat at the counter and did not move any of the papers. Nora worked through the tin box first. She read each document fully before setting it aside. When she reached the 1944 letter from the director of the Division of Water Resources, she read it 3 times. Then she looked up. She said they filed under dormant rights. Owen said yes. She said dormant rights requires the rights holder to have made no claim on the resource. He said yes. She picked up the tax receipts from 1963. The envelope organized by year, with the amount and date on each one in pencil. 70 envelopes in a rubber band. She looked at them. Then she looked at the 4 green notebooks stacked beside the box. Owen said there are 4 more. She said the notebooks are admissible as contemporaneous records if the entries are dated and consistent. He said they were dated. He said every entry was dated. She reached for the first notebook and opened to the first page. She read without speaking for 20 minutes. Owen and June left her to it. June made eggs. Owen went out and checked the cattle. When he came back, Nora was on the last pages of the 3rd notebook. She closed it and looked up. She said, "Dad, they moved your survey pin," he said in 1988. She said, "And you filed a boundary violation report." He said, "Same day as the survey correction." She wrote 2 lines on her legal pad. Then she said the dormant rights argument fails on the tax receipts alone. 70 consecutive years of tax payments is not abandonment under any interpretation of the West Virginia Code. But the 1944 letter is better than that. The state confirmed ownership in writing. You cannot abandon something the state has already acknowledged you own. She paused. She looked at the table. Then she said, "They searched the mineral index and found nothing." Owen said, "The water rights are filed separately." She looked at him. She said, "Did you know they would search the wrong index?" He said, "I knew they would search where they always search." June set a plate beside Nora's elbow without moving any of the papers. Nora looked at her father for a moment in the way that she had looked at him sometimes, since she was 13 years old. Since the fall of the moved survey pin, a look that was trying to understand something she could see the outline of, but could not fully measure. Then she picked up her pen and wrote the name of the filing attorney on her legal pad and underlined it. She called Slade's office from the Briggs farmhouse phone on Monday morning. She introduced herself as counsel of record for Owen Briggs, owner of Record Parcel 14, Section 7, Calhoun County. She said it without preamble and without the particular deference that Slade's office had come to expect from people calling about the Briggs parcel. The assistant asked her to hold. Slade came on the line in 4 minutes. She told him the family intended to respond to the dormant rights proceeding at the scheduled hearing before the Calhoun County Property Commissioner. She listed the 3 categories of documentation she would present. She described the conclusion the commissioner would reach, stated it plainly, and did not embellish. Then, she asked whether Crestline wished to discuss an alternative arrangement before the hearing date. Slade said he would need to consult with his client. She said, of course. She gave him her number. She hung up. Owen was at the kitchen table when she came back in. He looked at her. She sat down. She said he will call back. Owen looked out the window toward the well in the yard. The weathered wooden cover over the stone casing the same as it had been since 1931. Drawing from the same water 60 feet below, that ran through the same formation that the state had surveyed in 1924 and confirmed belonged to the Briggs family in 1944, and that Crestline had spent 15 years and considerable money trying to find a way around without ever looking in the right place. Slade called back in 3 hours. The hearing was scheduled. The preparation would take time, but the call back in 3 hours told Owen everything he needed to know about what Crestline's attorneys had found when they finally looked in the right place. He noted the time of the call in the 4th notebook. He wrote 1 sentence below it. He did not show Nora what he wrote. She would see it soon enough. Slade called back in 3 hours. That fact alone told Owen more than anything the man said when he finally spoke. 15 years of offers and delays and legal maneuvers, and the moment Nora used the phrase counsel of record and listed 3 categories of documentation, the response time dropped from weeks to hours. Owen noted it in the 4th notebook and closed it without showing Nora. She would understand it when she saw it. She already understood most things without being told twice. The hearing before the Calhoun County Property Commissioner was scheduled for the 3rd Tuesday of February 2002. Nora drove down from Charleston every weekend for 6 weeks beforehand. She worked at the kitchen table with the tin box open beside her laptop and Owen's 4 notebooks stacked in order to her left. She built the case the way Owen had built everything from the ground up, 1 documented layer at a time. Nothing assumed, nothing borrowed from inference when a primary source was available. The case was not complicated. That was its strength. Complexity was where expensive lawyers lived. Simplicity was where 70 years of consecutive tax receipts lived, and that was a different kind of home entirely. Owen watched her work on those weekend evenings, the way Walter had watched Owen at the kitchen table in 1958. Not hovering, not directing, just present. He brought coffee when the cup went empty. He answered questions when she had them. He did not volunteer information she had not asked for because she had inherited enough of his particular discipline to ask the right questions in the right order. June sat in the living room most evenings with her book, the lamp on beside her chair. The door open so she could hear the conversation in the kitchen without being part of it. She had survived the year of treatment and come back to herself in the way that some people come back. Not entirely the same shape as before, but recognizably the same person, quieter in some places and more certain in others. She did not ask Nora about the case. She had watched Owen for 30 years and she understood that the work was the answer to the question. You watched it happen. You did not ask it to explain itself. On the Sunday before the hearing, Nora spread the full case file across the kitchen table, in the order she intended to present it. She walked Owen through each section. He listened and asked 2 questions, both about dates, both of which she answered without looking at her notes. When she was done, she gathered the papers back into the folder and set it on the counter. She said, "They will try to argue that water rights are distinct from surface ownership in a way that breaks the tax continuity." Owen said there is a 1923 amendment that addresses that directly. She said, "Page 44 of the case file." He said yes. She looked at him. She said, "You have read the 1923 amendment." He said, "I read it in 1968. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did grandfather know about the amendment?" Owen said, "I think he knew there was something like it. He did not have the words for it." She nodded once and picked up her coffee. June called from the living room. She said dinner was ready. They put the papers away and ate. The hearing room at the Calhoun County Courthouse in Grantsville held perhaps 30 people when full. On the 3rd Tuesday of February, it held 11. 3 from Crestline's legal team. 2 of their geological consultants, Frank Slade at the front table in a suit that had not been bought in West Virginia. And beside him, a younger attorney Owen did not recognize. Nora sat across the table from them with the folder in front of her and a legal pad to her right. Owen sat beside her. June had stayed at the farm. She had said the night before that some things were better witnessed later through the telling of them. And Owen had understood what she meant. The property commissioner was a woman named Ruth Ann Boggs, who had held the position for 11 years, and who had the manner of someone who had seen most of the arguments that could be made in a room like this, and had stopped being impressed by the expensive suits some time ago. She opened the proceeding at 9 in the morning and gave each side 20 minutes. Slade went first. He presented the dormant rights argument with the polish of a man who had prepared it carefully and believed in it. The argument was not without merit on its face. Non-commercial use of a water rights claim over an extended period. The failure to develop or exploit the resource, the practical reality that the aquifer corridor had not been drawn from in any documented commercial sense since the state had surveyed it in 1924. He cited 3 West Virginia precedents. He spoke for 18 of his 20 minutes. Nora waited. When Commissioner Boggs nodded to her, she opened the folder and placed 3 documents on the table in front of her. She did not stand up. She spoke in a level voice without notes. She said the dormant rights doctrine required as a precondition the absence of any active claim on the resource by the owner of record. She placed the quiet title filing from 1968 on the table. She said it required the absence of ongoing governmental recognition of that ownership. She placed the 1944 letter from the director of the Division of Water Resources on the table. She said it required, above all, that no continuous record of acknowledged ownership existed in the public record. She placed the rubber-banded envelope on the table. 70 years of consecutive property tax receipts, each one in a Briggs name, each one bearing the county assessor's stamp. The most recent one dated April of the previous year. The amount and date written in pencil on the outside of the envelope in Owen's handwriting. She said the county of Calhoun has billed and collected property taxes on this parcel, including its appurtenant subsurface water rights, without interruption since 1931. She said the county's own records are not compatible with a finding of abandonment. She said to find abandonment here would require this commission to contradict 70 years of its own billing history. She picked up her coffee cup and set it back down. She said, "We have nothing further." Commissioner Boggs looked at the documents on the table. She looked at the rubber-banded envelope. She looked at the 1944 letter. She turned to Slade. She said, "Counsel, your dormant rights argument requires that the owner made no active claim on this resource. The state confirmed ownership in writing in 1944. The county has taxed it every year since 1931. In what sense has this claim been dormant?" Slade said the owner has made no commercial use of the water resource. Commissioner Boggs said the statute does not require commercial use. It requires active claim. Continuous taxation by the governmental authority constitutes active claim in the county's own records. She looked at her notes for a moment. Then she looked up. She said, "The commission finds for the respondent. The dormant rights proceeding is dismissed." She signed the dismissal order at 9:47 in the morning. The hearing had lasted 47 minutes. Slade's younger colleague was on his phone before they reached the hallway. Slade himself walked out without stopping, his briefcase in one hand, his eyes on the floor in the particular way of a man revising his estimate of a situation he had underestimated. Owen and Nora walked to the truck in the courthouse parking lot. The February air was cold and bright. Owen unlocked the passenger door and held it. Nora got in. He went around and started the engine and let it warm for a minute. She said, "They will call before the end of the week." He said, "Today." She looked at him. He said, "They have shareholders." She nodded slowly. Holt called at 2 in the afternoon. Not Slade. Holt himself, which told Owen everything the 3-hour callback had not fully confirmed. The CEO calling directly meant the board had been briefed. The board being briefed meant the number they were prepared to offer was no longer in Slade's authority to approve. Owen was at the kitchen table. June was in the garden despite the cold turning the soil in the beds they had planted together in May of 1999. Nora sat across from Owen with her legal pad in front of her. Holt introduced himself with the efficiency of a man who did not consider pleasantries useful. He said he was calling on behalf of Crestline's board of directors. He said the company had a significant operational interest in resolving the Briggs parcel matter and was prepared to have a serious conversation about terms. He said the word serious twice. Owen understood that Sirius was doing a specific kind of work in that sentence. Owen said, "I am listening." Holt said, $3.2 million full transfer of all surface and subsurface rights. 60-day close. Clean title. No encumbrances. Owen looked at the window. June was bending over the far bed, her back to the house, working the soil with a hand fork, the way she always did the first time in spring, getting the feel of it back. He said, "That is not what I am selling." Holt was quiet for 2 seconds. Owen had learned a great deal about what silences meant over the course of his life, and 2 seconds from a man like Holt was not confusion. It was recalibration. Holt said, "What is it you want, Mr. Briggs?" Owen said, "I will have my daughter call your office tomorrow morning with the terms." He thanked Holt for calling. He set the phone down. Nora looked at him across the table. She said, 3.2. He said yes. She said, "That is more than the farm has ever been worth on paper." He looked at her. He said, "The farm has always been worth what it is worth to the person who needs it." She picked up her pen. The terms Owen wanted were the same terms he had carried in his head for 20 years since the night in 1981, when he had finished reading the West Virginia Water Resources Act for the third time, and understood fully what the aquifer corridor meant to anyone who wanted to extract from the central Calhoun Basin at the volumes the geology permitted. He had never written them down, because writing them down would have been premature. And premature was the one thing Owen Briggs had never been. Nora wrote them down now on the legal pad in the order Owen stated them. A permanent consent agreement granting Crestline Energy Corporation the right to conduct extraction operations, intersecting or drawing from aquifer. Corridor 14B as surveyed in 1924 and confirmed in the state letter of September 1944 for the duration of those operations and no longer. Monthly payment to the owner of record of $5,800 adjusted for inflation every 3 years against the Consumer Price Index secured as a covenant running with the Crestline mineral rights parcels in Calhoun County, so that any future buyer or successor entity inherited the obligation, transferable in full to Owen's heirs upon his death, without renegotiation in perpetuity for as long as extraction operations continued. No sale of the surface parcel, no transfer of the water rights themselves, no waiver of the Briggs family's ownership of record. Not a sale, never a sale. Nora read the terms back when she had finished writing them. Owen listened with his eyes on the table. He said, "That is right." She underlined the last line twice. Not a sale, never a sale. She called Holt's office at 9 the following morning. She read the terms in their entirety without commentary. Holt's legal team asked for 48 hours to review. She said they had until Friday at 5. The negotiation lasted 4 days. Holt's team pushed on the inflation clause, calling it open-ended. Nora said it was non-negotiable. They pushed on the perpetuity language, arguing that operational conditions changed over time and a permanent obligation was commercially unreasonable. Nora said the permanence was the point. They proposed a buyout option at a fixed multiple after 20 years. Nora said no. They proposed a renegotiation trigger after 10 years. Nora said no. They proposed a one-time lump sum of $4.8 million in lieu of the monthly structure. Nora said no. On the 4th day, Holt himself got back on the phone. He was direct in a way that Owen's earlier callers had never been. And Owen, listening on the extension Nora had asked him to pick up, found that he respected it, even in a man whose company had moved his survey pin and sent intimidating lawyers to his kitchen table for 15 years. Holt said, "Your daughter is a good attorney." Owen said she is. Holt said the monthly structure with the inflation clause is going to cost us significantly over time. Owen said it should. There was a pause. Then Holt said, "All right." He accepted every term. Nora called Owen at 5:47 on a Friday afternoon in March of 2003. She said they signed. He was at the kitchen table. June was at the stove. He said all of it. She said everything. He said good work. He thanked her and set the phone down. June did not turn from the stove. She said, "Is it done?" He said, "It is done." She nodded once, her back still to him, and kept stirring whatever was in the pot. That was enough. It had always been enough in that kitchen, the small acknowledgments that carried the weight of things too large to state directly. The signing took place at the Calhoun County Clerk's office on a Wednesday in April. 3 copies, each one notarized by a woman named Carol, who had worked that office for 19 years, and who recognized Owen when he came through the door and said, "Mr. Briggs, I have not seen you in here in a while." He said it has been a couple of years. She processed the documents with the particular thoroughness of someone who understood that what moved across her desk mattered to the people it involved. She handed him his copy in a manila envelope and said all the best. He thanked her. He walked to the truck alone. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment. He took the fourth notebook from the seat beside him and opened it to the next blank page. He wrote the date. Then he wrote consent agreement signed. $5,800 due the first of every month. 47 acres. Still ours. He looked at what he had written. Then he turned back several pages to the entry from the night Nora had called him after the hearing. The entry he had not shown her. He had written one sentence below the note about Slade leaving the courthouse without stopping. They looked in the right place too late. He closed the notebook and set it on the seat beside him. The first check arrived on May 1st, as agreed, the amount printed on a Crestline Energy corporate check. The memo line reading per consent agreement. Parcel 14B, Calhoun County. Owen deposited it at the Grantsville Savings and Loan. He paid off the remainder of the equipment loan and the farm loan in the same visit. The teller was a young woman who had not been born when he took out the first loan. She processed the payoffs without knowing what they represented. That was fine. Most things that mattered did not require an audience. In June, the county newspaper, the Calhoun Chronicle, ran a brief item on the business page. 3 paragraphs. It described the consent agreement in general terms, the parties involved, the monthly payment structure, the covenant running with the Crestline parcels. It did not photograph anyone. It did not explain the 45 years of preparation behind the 3 paragraphs. Newspapers rarely did. Gerald Vance was 88 years old and living at a care facility in the hills east of Charleston. A woman who worked there as a nursing aide had a cousin in Grantsville who knew Owen's neighbor. And through that particular chain of rural connectivity that operates in West Virginia, the same way it always has, Owen heard the following month that Vance had been given a copy of the newspaper item by a former colleague, that he had read it at the table in the common room, that he had read it again, that he had folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of his bedside table without saying a word to anyone in the room. Owen heard this and nodded and went back to what he had been doing. He did not feel triumphant. He had not expected to. Triumph was for people who had been waiting to win. Owen had not been waiting to win. He had been waiting for the thing Walter showed him to matter in the way Walter had known it would matter. And now it had. And what he felt was not triumph, but something quieter and more complete. A kind of settled rightness. The feeling of a long piece of work finished properly. The summer that followed was the kind of summer that stays in a person's memory, less for its events than for its quality, the particular texture of ordinary days, when the large thing is resolved, and what remains is simply the life itself. Owen cut hay in July. June replanted the south garden and grew more tomatoes than they could reasonably eat, and gave most of them to the neighbors down the road. The well ran cold and clear through August. Owen checked the level in September the way he had checked it every September since 1963, and wrote the measurement in the notebook. In August, Nora drove out with her son Marcus. He was 8 years old, a quiet boy with his mother's careful eyes and a habit of watching things for longer than most children watch them before asking his question. He had been to the farm before, but this was the first time Nora brought him when there was something specific she wanted him to see. She brought him to the back room and showed him the tin box on the shelf. He looked at it. He said, "What is in it?" She said, "Everything your great-great-grandfather kept." He said, "Why did he keep it?" She said, "Because he knew it would matter." Marcus looked at the box for a moment. He said, "How did he know?" Nora looked at the box, too. She said, "He paid attention to what other people decided was not worth paying attention to." Marcus reached out and touched the latch. He did not open it. He looked at his mother. She nodded, and he lifted it and looked inside at the papers and the envelopes and the 3 documents under the cardboard. Owen appeared in the doorway. Marcus looked at him. He said, "Grandpa, how much is all of this worth?" Owen came into the room and stood beside him and looked at the box. He said, "Depends on how long you keep it." Marcus looked at the papers. He said, "How long should I keep it?" Owen said, "Longer than anyone thinks you need to." Marcus reached into his pocket and took out a small composition notebook. The kind with the mottled black and white cover, the kind that had been in Grantsville's hardware store in the school supply section for as long as anyone could remember. He had bought it that morning. He set it on the shelf beside the tin box. Owen looked at it. He did not say anything. Later that afternoon, Marcus asked if he could walk the fence line. Owen took him out after lunch and they walked the perimeter the way Owen had walked it twice a year since 1963. Clockwise from the north corner, checking each survey pin in sequence. Marcus walked beside him and did not talk much. At each pin, he watched Owen press his thumb against the iron and waited to see if anything needed to be noted. Nothing did. All 4 pins were where they should be, solid in the ground, undisturbed. At the northeast corner, the one Owen had found moved in 1988 and reset in concrete. Marcus crouched down and looked at the base of the pin. He touched the concrete. He said, "Why is this one different?" Owen said someone tried to move it once. Marcus stood up and looked at the pin, and then at the land beyond it. The crestline parcels stretching away to the north. The drill rigs visible in the middle distance, working steadily. He said, "Did they know you would notice?" Owen said they thought I wouldn't. Marcus looked at the rigs for a moment. Then he said, "But you always check." Owen said, "Twice a year, spring and fall." Marcus took out the composition notebook and wrote the date and a description of the pin. He wrote the measurement from the fence line. He wrote all 4 pins clear. He closed the notebook and put it back in his pocket. They walked back to the farmhouse in the long light of the August afternoon. The grandfather and the boy through the pasture that Walter had bought in 1931 and worked until 1963 and left to Owen with a tin box and a set of habits and the understanding that the valley remembers what people forget. Nora was on the porch when they came up from the lower field. She watched them come across the yard. She had a cup of coffee and she was leaning against the post, the way Owen leaned against it in the evenings, which was a thing she had always done without noticing and which he had always noticed without saying. Marcus went inside to find June. Owen came up the steps and stood beside his daughter. He looked out at the farm in the August light, the well cover in the yard. The south garden June had replanted, the hills going blue in the late afternoon the way they always did in August in Calhoun County. Nora said he is going to be all right. Owen said yes. She said he already checks things twice. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said he asked the right question. She looked at him. He said he asked how long he should keep it. He didn't ask what it was worth right now. She nodded slowly. They stood on the porch in the easy silence that had always been the language of that family. The silence that was not absence but presence, that was not emptiness but the weight of things understood without being spoken. Inside, June was talking to Marcus about the tomatoes, explaining which ones were ready and which ones needed another week, and his voice came back with questions. The particular kind of questions that children ask when they are genuinely interested, rather than politely attending. Owen reached into the pocket of the canvas coat. The coat was 45 years old now, replaced once in 1971 and once in 1989, but always the same canvas coat because it was the right coat for the work. He took out a piece of paper folded into quarters. Nora watched him unfold it. It was a page from a composition notebook, the kind with the blue lines and the red margin. The paper had gone soft at the folds from years of being carried. Owen opened it flat and held it so she could see. There was a map drawn in crayon, red lines for the outer edges of something, green for a section in the middle, brown for a fence line. In the center, a small square with words written in the careful handwriting of a 9-year-old boy, Briggs Farm. Below the map, in the same careful printing but in brown crayon, 4 words. Nora read them. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He wrote this at the auction. Owen said that night at the table after. He told me what to write and I wrote it." She looked at the paper. She said, "You have carried this since 1958. He folded it back into quarters and put it in his coat pocket. He said Walter knew they would need what we had. He just wanted me to remember not to give it to them before they needed it badly enough for it to matter." The sun was going down behind the ridge. The drill rigs on the Crestline parcels to the north were going quiet for the evening. The way they did every evening. The way they had done every evening since the consent agreement was signed. Drawing from the aquifer that the state had surveyed in 1924 and confirmed belonged to the Briggs family in 1944, and that would belong to Marcus one day, and to Marcus's children. After that, for as long as the water ran and the work continued. And someone walked the fence line twice a year and pressed their thumb against each iron pin and knew what they were checking for and why. Owen went inside. June handed him a cup without being asked. Marcus was at the kitchen table with the composition notebook open in front of him, writing the day's entries in his careful 8-year-old handwriting. The mottled black and white cover creased already at the spine, the way notebooks get creased when they are used instead of kept. Owen sat across from him. He did not look at what Marcus was writing. He drank his coffee. Outside the window, the valley held its silence the way it always had, patient and complete, remembering everything that people in their hurry forgot.